maybe I've succeeded, but I've succeeded in the wrong way. And the quote goes, and I'm sure you've heard this, but it's, if you want to go fast, go alone. I think the journey is you have to make the mistake and you have to learn from yourself. It's the same as parents telling us, don't make the mistakes we make. We do, right?
Hello, and welcome to the latest episode in Leadership Blueprint. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by Dr. Zaheera Soomar. As a global leader within the sustainability space, Dr. Zaheera has worked across over 70 different countries. She has led across public sector, energy, done a number of transformation projects. She's also basically worked across consulting, education as well. So I think the journey that she's been on across multiple countries, verticals, and from a sustainability standpoint and everything that's going on at the moment within the Middle East is a really interesting person to have on today, and something that I'm really keen to explore further in the podcast. So Dr. Zaheera, thank you so much for joining us today. As we mentioned there very quickly to the listeners around some of the countries and backgrounds that you've covered, I think it'd be great just to, in your own words, give them a couple of minutes introduction, add a little bit more information for them, and then we can dive into a few specific questions. But once again, thanks so much for joining us, and over to you, as they say.
Thanks, Oliver. Thanks for having me today. Yeah, I mean, I think you summed it up well. If I had to sum up my career, for me, it's kind of like finding my path in a bit of different way. So trying to find and trying to learn more about who I am, what my purpose is, and truly kind of what legacy I want to leave on this earth, and kind of living by that. And so in my career, I've changed paths many different times, whether it's country, geographies, verticals, focus areas. I've always allowed kind of doors to open, and I've just followed my intuition and gut. And that's what it's been for me. And I think that that's what the next, I don't know, 20 years of my career will still be. It's me just kind of seeing where it takes me, trying to have a good impact, and just trying to figure out myself along this journey as well.
And I think that that's a really nice, insight and inroad into today. And I think with everything that's happening in the world, the change, the transformation that's going on, I think a great place for us to start is for you. You've got a really notable background in both the public and the private sector, and I think I'm always kind of intrigued to see, what are you considering or what are you seeing as some of those biggest shifts affecting that in the modern era and forward into the future. So I think if we could start there, I think that would be a really good place.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a number of them. I think, climate change, ESG are very big shifts we are seeing, and they're dominating the discussion. If you look at Davos and you look at the discussions that take place at Davos, climate change and ESG kind of take front and center stage a lot of the time. There's also the digital and data economy that's driving a lot of change and rapid change, geopolitics, and then consumer and social behavior and expectations associated, along with kind of things like decentralized finance and crypto. All of these things are kind of major big shifts that we're seeing in the economy. I think one notable one that I'll mention is probably AI. For me personally, I think it's a bit scary. I don't consider myself old, and I don't consider myself unteachable, but it is something that's moving at such a rapid pace. And it is occupying the business and organizational space so much in terms of the way things are done, the way processes, the way labor is done. And if you don't actually keep up with it, you can kind of really fall behind very quickly. And I think AI is shifting the way a lot of things are being done and a lot of way decisions are being made as well.
No, absolutely. And I think from every aspect, we're seeing this in terms of profiles of candidates that JOH Partners need to source. JOH Partners themselves is developing, some AI specific products that will be for clients. So I think there's a lot of fundamental shifts that are taking place, some which I'm very excited to be embracing, and some which I share the thoughts of you that some are a little bit terrifying. And I think we'll have to see, for good or bad, how they play out. Fingers crossed for good, of course, but it's going to be very interesting. Thinking back to your background in terms of there's been public-private sector, specifically part of that's been on the education side. How do you kind of see, from an education space, a global shift, poverty, spend, and then putting AI on top? What's your kind of take on how AI might specifically change some of the investment trends and sustainability within youth and education, because I think it's going to have to change, and equally it's not even working everywhere very well at the moment. So I think there's a bit of a, my gosh, where could this need to go and change? I'd just be really intrigued to get a bit of an insight from yourself on that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I've worked extensively in the education space, and I'll quote my former president, Mandela, Nelson Mandela from South Africa. And he said many, many years ago, which is a quote that's re-quoted many times, that education is the single most important weapon to kind of reducing poverty. And it is true. It is not the only thing that reduces poverty, but the role that kind of education plays in society, in poverty reduction, in social cohesion, inclusion, and just your ability to participate in the economy is huge. Now, most countries around the world have this massive education gap. And what used to be isn't what is now. And so there's been this, let's take 10 years ago, like a decade ago, there were many, what, for lack of a better word, third world countries or countries lacking in education or not ranked high, playing catch up on the education side. And they were making gains because these very purposeful, deliberate attempts to make education gains were put in place. Now, with technology and with AI, the world is moving at a much faster pace. And what we're seeing is these education gains aren't keeping up in the way that they used to, number one. And number two, the gap is becoming wider and further. Because not only are we trying to play catch up with education when it comes to basic literacy and numeracy, even at a youth and adult level, but now you're putting on top kind of digital AI, all of these things that, when you go to a lot of rural countries or communities, they don't even know what AI is. When you talk about digital technology, the concept or what you're talking about, virtual reality, they've never heard of these words and they don't even understand it. So we're trying to play catch up and we're trying to get them up to speed with these new shifts that we're seeing in the economy. But I think what AI or what we're trying to do in that space with AI is we're trying to leverage AI to really play kind of catch up. And so you're seeing a lot more robotics come through. You're seeing a lot more AI-based gaming, AI-based education tools. And these are what's being created to try and not just cater for the speed of closing the gap, but also kind of this dual function of you've got to become literate and numerate, but you've also got to understand the role of digital and data and what it's doing in the economy in order to even participate in the economy and get a job. I don't think we're there yet. I don't even see complete glimmers of hope because of just the lack of education and literacy and numeracy globally, just at a youth and adult level. Forget about kind of early childhood. And it's going to take a lot more. It's going to take a lot of investment. And then we see things like, global funding being cut at the moment. And so when you bring all these political aspects into play, it really does impact some of these global missions around educational health and what is being trying to achieve.
No, absolutely. And I think you touching on there, some of those changes in spends at government level, the impact it's having, even on educated professionals. There are regulatory changes, even within the UAE coming in next year. Automatic payments will massively affect certain people within, payroll processing finance roles. So I think there's all aspects of life. There is some real fundamental shifts happening. But from your side, you've obviously advised, you've worked with countries advising on sort of public sector reform. What's maybe one of the biggest misconceptions or one of the biggest challenges that you've seen within that space? What's kind of that been for you?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think this is more relevant in public sector. However, I've seen it a lot in private sector as well. For me, it would probably be playing the long game. I think that's what's missing sometimes in the strategic approach or the misconception. Many times in public sector, you see a new leader come in, and that leader wants to leave or make their mark for whatever term they're going to be in service, whether it's 4 years, 8 years. it depends on the type of country and kind of the structure you have in that country for government. But many leaders will come in and they want to either reset, reshape, or leave a legacy based on their term. And oftentimes it's kind of, for their own sake, but not for the sake of who they're trying to deliver. And
Yeah.
when you look at history and kind of what really works, it's really about playing that long game. And sometimes in private sector, they get it right. It's not about the leader. It's not about your legacy. Sometimes it's about, if there's something being done really well, it's about continuing that journey, regardless of whether you came up with the strategy or whether somebody else came up with that. And sometimes we're so busy on shifting the strategy and creating a new legacy that momentum is lost, that focus is lost. And the leader might be there 4 to 8 years, but the citizen is there for their life, right? And so we
Yeah.
need to be thinking more long term. We need to be playing the long term game. It's not about that individual's leader's legacy. It is about the people that you're trying to deliver the service for, and long term, what is going to benefit them, not about you as an individual person or that government.
Yeah, and that's very much even in private sector. You see that a lot with, I think, comp and bend structures that
Mm?
reward C-level in potentially the wrong way. So they are looking at short-term gains, elevate a stock price, pick up a bonus, and so on and so forth. So I think there is some fundamental shifts on multiple parts of the world that could be addressed for sure. I think there's
Yeah.
there's plenty of challenges, in terms of you've worked on a lot of transformation projects. What would you kind of say from a sort of leadership development program? What's been some of the more interesting and challenging data driven projects and lessons and exposure that you've worked on? And is there one or two that you could share with us in terms of, this was a really exciting project we worked on, but actually the data bit was the data was the bit that was actually really exciting to drive this. However, it became actually the most challenging part because people actually didn't like the data, or they didn't want to see the data, or when they saw the data, they told a very different story, and the ramifications of that were something we didn't expect at the start. Yeah, I'm intrigued to just get a bit of a data-driven transformation. I think those stories are always really intriguing, and how you kind of dealt with some of those and lessons learned.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for most of the projects that I've worked in, like large scale transformations, there's always been a data-driven component to it. And the
Mm,
reason being is that most of the time in public sector, you're talking about large scale transformation where people are involved, you're talking about behavior change, or you're talking about change management, right? And a lot of that is qualitative. And so it's this kind of like iffy feely type of thing where it's hard to put data, or it's hard to quantify something, and it's hard to be factual about things. Um, but in order to actually move or make decisions or make changes, especially when you're coming to policy changes, you have to be backing it up with data. And so you have to come up with ways to kind of collect data and measure data in a very touchy-feely, qualitative way when it comes to people and change and
mm,
behavior, etc. And so there's been lots of tools that have been created around psychosocial awareness, mental health, a lot of these tools where you can quantify how someone feels, even personality testing, right? So I'm sure this is
yep.
something you do quite a bit in kind of your career, where you're really trying to understand the person, their personality, their dominant behavior, what leads them to act in this way, what leads them to not act in this way, what's impulsive, etc. And so there's a lot of these new tools, and they keep improving around measuring some of those things. I think for me, there's been tremendous insight and surprises when working in that, because often how you think people feel based on your experience and your perception and how you've
Mm,
lived isn't how people feel, right? I'll give you a very simple example. I was working in DRC maybe about 13, 14 years ago. And I was actually looking after the business improvement across multiple mines. But I was very interested in kind of just social impact and kind of giving back and improving people's lives. And so I kind of did this a bit as my kind of side gig. It wasn't even part of my role, but I had this, I think it's always been intrinsic in me to kind of feel this way. And a lot of people lived in rural communities that worked at the mines, and they still lived in like hut structures, if you can call it that, where you'd come out of your house and there's mud everywhere. And DRC had these like rainy seasons, and so you would have when it rains, the mud just really kind of piles up. It becomes really gross and kind of muddy and seeps into the house, etc. And you think, oh goodness, this is it impacts everything. It impacts their living condition. And so there was this international organization that came up with some sort of not a mat, but some sort of a thing that can be easily made out of tire material, so it doesn't cost a lot, that you could put in the front or surround the house that prevented mud from kind of, getting up and coming into the house, etc. So anyway, they manufactured this and they wanted to teach local people how to make this and run it as kind of a social enterprise and then put it in people's homes. So not only would they kind of make money out of it, but they would be able to use this and alleviate some of the hardship. And they did all of that. And there was such a pushback from the community around, we don't want this. We didn't ask for this. We don't see it as a burden. This is a way of life for us. Why are you solving problems that we've not even registered as problems? If you want to help us with problems, here's a set of problems that we really need help with. And I mean, I've got many, many stories of this. I've got a similar story of us putting in flush toilets in South Africa at schools when they had long drops where kids were even falling into it. Just public sentiment or citizen sentiment around what you think is their biggest problems versus what they consider them is a very big eye opener many times, and data brings us to the foreplay.
No, I think it's a really good point there. I mean, the biggest bit we see is, in any sort of business that is successful is answering the question that the customer wanted. And it is a lot of that time. There's a very interesting gentleman called Daniel Priestley that I've seen speak a couple of times, and he's a big believer in setting up a like a waiting list. So you have your concept, you explain it to the individuals, a bit like a very simplistic, to describe it to the listeners. Sort of, you have your landing page with the idea, you have a waiting list of, would you be interested to hear more, sign up to a newsletter, but all that kind of stuff, like a very, very basic thing. There's more complexity to that, but if nobody signs up, they don't care. Don't go further.
Exactly.
If you don't do it if you've got no idea how to do it at all. But you don't have to 110% have the finished thing there. You need to know that you can do it. You need to have a reasonable idea and a reasonable how it would fit together and so on and so forth. But the final piece is do it when you know that there is that desire, that want, and whether that is people in the DRC, people in South Africa, or whether that's some of the projects you've done in the Middle East, or whether that's a waiting list for a new SaaS business. There is a lot to be said about like you said, fix the problem that actually people need fixing.
Exactly. And sometimes we'll come to the table with them and we'll say, we'll go through consultation with them around how to fix the problem, but we don't actually ask them, what is your problem? We've already predefined that for them. It's like, we've identified the problem. Now we're going to get around the table to discuss with you how we collectively fix it. But kind of like, just take a step back and let's collectively even agree, and not even collectively agree, just ask the question, what is your biggest problem at this moment? And if we could help you solve for one thing that would make a life-changing experience for you right now, what would that be? And I guarantee you 9 out of 10 times we'd be surprised.
100%. And again, it's the whole, that analogy, 2 ears, 1 mouth, 2 more listening than talking, and you'll put yourself in a better position. So I think that leads quite nicely into, obviously your doctorate. Your doctorate was in, the future shape of the workplace. And, what were some of the things that you either discovered, uncovered, or some of the work since that you're seeing as where the trends are going in the future? And we've talked a little about AI and things that I'm sure might play a part in your answer, but what do you see as those shifts that organizations need to be aware of and acting on? Because yes, AI might be an input, but the output of how that affects the workplace, I think that's the piece which I see a lot of workplaces not being quite aware of. Like, yep, shiny syndrome, something new, better play with it. But what's the longer term impact? How do we get ahead of that potential staff problem, structure problem, et cetera, et cetera? So what are some of the insights you could share with us on that?
Yeah, I think what came out of my doctorate specifically, I took a bit of a narrow focus or narrow research focus when I did it, and it was specifically on certain sectors, not all sectors, but it did look at kind of big organizations, kind of national, global organizations, etc. And I think the thing that stood out for me most, especially, I did a quantitative and qualitative study. The thing that came out for me most was kind of just flexibility and agility to what we think employees want and need. And workplaces have been moving towards this over the past decade, 10 to 15 years, around flexibility. COVID made a big shift for this and in this space as well, around remote working, and even just removing barriers around remote working and stigmas associated, and offering alternate options, which even open doors for kind of hiring solutions and kind of cross geography talent hiring, etc. Um, but what we're seeing is, and I'm sure, Oliver, you're seeing this a lot in your work, is that generational behavior and trends are different. What Gen X and what millennials and Gen Ys displayed is very different to what we're seeing with Gen Zs, and kind of even the Gen Alpha that's coming through. Um,
Mm,
what people want, how they behave, how they respond to a situation, the type of work that they're looking for, the hours, the flexibility, those are all changing. This notion of kind of lifelong employees, I think that that's probably gone at this moment in time, where people dedicate their life to an organization. Organizations loved that at one point. I don't think that they value that completely. I mean, some do, but those that are kind of moving at a rapid pace don't, because they're looking for top talent. They're looking for people that can evolve, that can take things forward. And so this job security thing, no longer exists with, I'm going to work for 25, 30 years for an organization. I'm going to get my pension, and then I'm going to kind of go off at 60 and I'm going to enjoy the rest of my life. That doesn't exist anymore. People are working way
yeah.
beyond 60. Life is expensive. Some people don't want one job. Some people want to do a bunch of different things. They want to fulfill their purpose and fill their cup in multiple ways. And so, and then there's also, just when you think about equality and kind of males in the workplace, and what does that look like? I think people want different things right now that fill their cup. And so the
Yeah.
ability to provide that and offer that by workplaces in multiple ways, and not with the understanding that all my employees are not the same, I think that's
Yeah.
going to be important. And if you really want to attract the best talent, retain them, and also kind of fuel their passion, I think workplaces are going to have to do that. It's not easy, but
Mm-hmm.
talent is pushing workplaces in that direction.
100%. And it ties really well in with, trying to remember how far back, about 3 podcasts ago. I know by the time this goes live, it'll be further than that back. So about 10 podcasts ago, by the time this one goes live, we've got a bit of a backlog at the moment. We had a podcast with the ex head of Mubadala, Comp and Benz. And the big thing that she was talking about was very much the personalization
Mm?
of your comp and ben structure due to the change in workforce. And I think it's a big thing that you see, the change that is coming is that personalization piece. It is making something meaningful. It is listening to them again. It is what matters to them. And it's those trends that keep flowing and continuing through. And we've touched on AI today, personalization, AI, looking at leadership. How do you kind of see, or how do you believe from, the future workforce, how do you see AI affecting leadership and the potential skills gap that may be coming in there from a leader, what they need to bring to their team? And maybe we don't even know what that's going to be yet, but what's your insight into that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing there's a lot of research and there's a lot of kind of thinking coming out of this already around adoption of AI, bringing AI into kind of leadership roles, making decisions. I think there's going to be gains and losses. I think there's going to be a huge learning curve and a kind of an adaptation curve as well. I think what we're seeing is leaders are using AI to be more data decision driven. So you have more facts at hand, which is
Mm,
great because what it does is it gives you a kind of a bigger confidence, or for lack of a better way of putting it, it mitigates your risks. Because if you have hard and fast data to substantiate a decision that you're making, it's very easy to get consensus around the room that that's the right decision, and there's kind of collective buy-in, and you kind of go for it. I think that one of the things we probably seeing as a loss is kind of the human-centric approach, and I hope that we don't lose this with, technology and AI. Is that with the automation of everything and with this predictive behavior and with algorithmic, algorithms, etc.
mm,
You kind of lose the essence of humanistic or human-centric behavior or even consumer-centric behavior, which is, at the end of the day, we are all human beings. And an
yeah.
algorithm cannot cater for how many millions of different types of beings we are. We are not all the same. And so it takes an approach, algorithms take an approach of kind of biggest or majority, right? And what the statistics show, and they kind of go with it.
Hmm.
And we all know what are the downsides of AI around bias, discrimination, the back end of algorithms and how they're built, and they're created off behavior. And behavior is also created off societal norms, which has bias and discrimination built in to start off with. And so are we not just kind of, is it not just a recurring machine to reinforce bias or discrimination? So there's a lot of questions around this. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think it speeds things up. I think it gives you a lot more data decision driven, data driven decision making. I think it gives higher confidence levels. I think scenario planning becomes easier, and so maybe decision making becomes easier or less risky. But I don't know if we lose humanity or human-centric approach or kind of treating each other as human beings. That's a bit of the scary part for me. That's a bit of the things that we need to watch out for.
100%. And I think the bit that's we all kind of know in a way is, ultimately a lot of the tech that we are looking at the moment has come from people that thought about things in a different way. Um, and I do sort of question how many people are going to come up with a completely brand new idea if we're all being fed the algorithm says you should do this. The algorithm says here's the thing that you like the most. Here's the whatever it is. It at least on a basic level will stifle some creativity. There will always be the outliers who do certain things, but I wonder how it will affect not the Bezos of the world, but maybe the people that weren't quite as crazy as him, but the those individuals that maybe aren't being going to be pushed in quite the same way due to the algorithm pushing the same idea to them and a lot of other people. So that will be interesting to see. I think you
Absolutely.
guys,
Yeah.
yeah, the guys at the end of the spectrum will always kind of be fine. But if you're in that, 75% of the bell curve, does it kind of stop you pushing further out? I think that will be the interesting part. Is does it
Yeah.
stifle the extreme creativity part? But let's see. But I think from an ESG sustainability standpoint, you've advised a lot of businesses on this. So looking at technology, the intersection in that midpoint, where do you kind of see the responsibility for business coming in the years to come? Because I think that transformation and growth piece is going to be very interesting. But yeah, I think just you expanding on that a bit more is going to be a really good one to hear a bit more in your own words, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I think there's good. I think AI, data, digital economy can play a bigger role in how businesses are responsible. I think there's also a responsibility that businesses will have to play if they bring a lot more of this into kind of the workplace, right? So I think there's a kind
Mm,
of a dual approach. So on the first side, when you're thinking about ESG and you're thinking about transparency, accountability, all of these things. Things like ethical sourcing has become a huge consideration in many industries. If you think about mining, oil and gas, just the carbon side of things, consumers, your end consumer who is buying a ring, right, an engagement ring, wants to know not only who the company I'm buying it from, but which country did it come from? How was that diamond sourced underground? What machinery was used? Was there environmental impact associated? And how did it actually come to the retailer that I bought it for? And that's a long chain right there in and of itself, and just one example. But this is where consumers are going at the moment to think about, like, ethical sourcing, responsible sourcing. What am I contributing by buying this item? What am I contributing to this world, good or bad? And ethical sourcing isn't something that has been easy, because it takes a lot of work to track it. And companies haven't been doing this. You maybe go kind of one stage back. So things like AI, data, digital, it's going to help in terms of creating transparency. It's going to help in terms of being accurate, in terms of just reporting accuracy, in giving kind of full scope of ethical sourcing, etc. So it's going to do a lot in the way of really just opening up and being transparent across the board on what decisions you as an organization have made, and hold you accountable to that. And the consumer can see that. On the other side, business has to be responsible when bringing in AI. And so, like we talked about earlier, there's bias, there's discrimination, there's so many other things around taking your workforce with you when you do this transition. There's a responsibility that the organization will also have to play in making sure, if they drive this and bring this in, that they fully adapt and that they understand the consequences or downsides of this as well.
Yeah. Okay. So what's maybe, in your experience, one of the biggest misconceptions then from companies when it comes to, the ethical governance side then? So what have some of those examples been?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't say this is across the board, but I think it's for majority of the part, especially in the ESG world. It's that companies do this from a compliance perspective. We're doing it because we have to do it. We do it because it's a tick box exercise. We do it because it's regulation and it's license based, and the UN says we have to do it, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And so what happens is there's the scorecard, or there's some sort of reporting, and you have to kind of meet that reporting in order to whatever you're going to benefit from that. If you're doing things simply from a compliance or tick box exercise, you are considering it down the line in order to fit that tick box or that compliance, in order to tick it off, right? It's not embedded upfront early on in your thinking, in your innovation, in your decision making, in your investments. It is not forefront for you enough in the organization. And so organizations really need to build this more as a strategic enabler. They need to think about this as they want to do it, not they have to do it. And a lot of the times, a lot of companies who report on ESG report on it, but if you go and look at their behavior, nothing's changed. Nothing fundamental has changed in the way that they've done things, think about things, or make decisions. There's just simply a few extra steps that have been added in order to tick the box. That's all.
So when you're working with some of these businesses, is it I know there's always a top-down approach. You need the lead, the main individual to buy into this. But do you find you've got the CEO bought in? Are you then having to do a lot of work with leaders further down the food chain to make sure that they're understanding the social impact as well of those behaviors and decisions? Or is it, at what stage do you see it kind of takes care of itself, and at what stage it doesn't matter if I've got the buy-in at the top? There's so many layers down the organization until it really starts to stick. If you've been able to kind of find the sweet spot, and maybe you haven't yet, but I'm just intrigued, you need to go much deeper than we first thought many years ago, because otherwise it just doesn't stick? Or have you had any insight around that?
I mean, I think there's not one answer for that. I think it maybe starts at kind of what the type of organization is or the purpose of the organization. Purpose-led organizations, NGOs, it's a lot more easier to kind of build this in. It's probably already built in, and they are very purpose-driven. And then you're trying to kind of just fine-tune the way they think about it and the efficiency gains. But a company that is purely for profit and their scorecard is financial and all they're thinking about is shareholder return, that's when it
Mm,
becomes more challenging. And so, yes, most of the time in organizations that I've worked in, it's the CEO buys in, and then there's multiple layers of which you've got to convince. And again, depending on the business unit that they're in, the vertical, that could be harder or that could be easier in an
okay.
ESG or a corporate communication business unit, it's substantially easier because people in that unit kind of agree to it and they buy into it. And
Mm,
in that unit, you understand how social impact translates into reputation and trust, and how reputation and trust actually translates into bottom line at the end of the day. But if you go to a technical department, um, you
mm,
know, or you go to a department that's focused on kind of core production, um, they work in a very kind of black and white way around kind of cost, revenue, bottom line,
mm,
savings, etc. It's much harder to convince them because it comes out of their cost center, and they
yeah.
don't necessarily see the revenue gains. And reputation and trust is not for them to kind of manage. And so again, it depends. It depends on the organization and it depends on the vertical. But it's never. I've never come across a situation where it's just about convincing the CEO. I've never had that.
Okay. And so across your career, like we said, multiple countries, multiple verticals. What's been some of the most surprising sort of leadership lessons that you've experienced along the way? What are some of the things that, looking back, yeah, what are some of those surprises and leadership lessons that you could share on the career journey today, as it were?
Yeah, I guess for me, it's, early on in my career, especially as kind of a minority female, what
Mm,
I thought makes a good leader isn't what I respected of my leaders and isn't kind of what I then landed up thinking about me being a leader.
okay.
Earlier on in my career, I always thought what makes a good leader is, working hard, churning out things, being the last one to leave, getting things right. The more
Mm,
accurate you were, the better you were, etc. Not making mistakes, those types of things, and always being confident, never showing weakness, kind of being bold.
mm,
That's what I thought, especially as a female, because when I started, I was in a very male-dominated environment. I was in oil and gas, and my coaches used to always tell me, you've got to make your presence known and you've got to speak in the room and you've got to make yourself heard, etc. And then as I became middle management and I was finding myself kind of in this intermediary space of managing people, but also being managed, I think I reflected a lot on how I was managing people and what I thought was good leadership, but how I was being managed. And I think the thing that struck me was that I appreciated people who were relatable, people who would
mm,
listen, a leader who would listen, a leader that was relatable, a leader that came across as a human being, where perfection wasn't what we strived for, where
yeah.
there was authenticity, and so and that's what I started appreciating, and that's the leader I started working towards. And for me, I think it's not about getting everything right. It really is
Yeah.
just about being humanistic. It is about being approachable. It is about being authentic. There's beauty in showing vulnerability, and there's beauty in showing how you can pick yourself up from a failure or a mistake, and how you get up and how you kind of push forward. And for
Yeah.
me, that's what's appealed to me, and that's the type of leader that I've been working towards. In the I would say in the last bit of my career, and kind of want to continue to work towards. It's that you can be your true self, and you can be fully human, and not kind of this perfect exterior thing that doesn't break down. And I would say I would extend that to even parenthood, Oliver, because
Mm,
my notion of
yeah.
what being a good parent was when I was growing up versus what I'm seeing now and what I feel I need to teach my children is different. And it is about, you know what,
100%.
you have bad days, and that's okay, and we'll get through it.
We all know that one. We all know that one. But even on the parent side for a second, like even I have a 6-year-old and 2-year-old. Even within the 6-year-old's journey, I can see how I'm doing things different year to year as I think you learn, grow, and they
Mm,
express themselves, and you have to give them, and you make it more personalized, and all those things I think come with that. So it all does tie together. And you're right. I think sometimes people look at them as very separate. This is my work life. This is my personal life. And while there should be a bit of a wall between them,
mm,
they are very dependent on each other.
mm,
If home life is
absolutely.
good, work. If one is bad, it's very hard to keep the other one good. Um, you did touch on failures. What's maybe your biggest lesson learned from failure? Because I think they're where you see the most growth in people, is how you see it, understand it, and move forward from it. So what was your kind of your standout biggest failure that you learned the most from?
Yeah. Um, I actually was thinking about this, and one that kept coming up for me, and I kept having to reflect on quite a bit. And it's also just a lesson that I've learned many, many, many times. Not because I failed at it necessarily, but because maybe I've succeeded, but I've succeeded in the wrong way. And the quote goes, and I'm sure you've heard this, but it's, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And the reason I talk about this is because, and it's very personal to me as the type of person I am. I'm a very
Mm,
independent person. I can work individually and I can work as a team, but I work very fast and I'm very meticulous and I get things done. And
yep.
I would say my downside is that I rely on myself, or have relied on myself, way too much, without giving others the opportunity to also depend on them. And that's again personal and professional. And
Yeah.
for me, the way I reckon with this is that sometimes I've got a task, I need to get it done. If I give it to my team, or if I do it with a team, it's going to take substantially longer. You know what? It's just easier if I do it myself. I can get it done quickly. I can make sure it's perfect and it's done, and I don't have to worry about it. And there's no chance of it being failing or anything like that. That's been the notion, because it's been always about, there's so many things to get done. Let's be productive. Let's do it. But what you're not doing is you're not taking people on a journey with you. People do
Yeah.
not buy into what you're trying to do. You are not allowing people to learn from the opportunity that you're kind of undergoing as a team. And secondly, you are giving into your bias on what needs to be done and how it needs to be done. Whereas if you consulted with a team and did it with a team, you might surprise yourself in that there might be other options of doing it better or differently. And there isn't only one way of doing it or one right answer. And so for me, it's been a journey, and I've had to step back and I've had to just be patient. I've had
Mm.
to my earlier comment of playing the long game, I've had to learn to play the long game. The result will come later, but there'll be so many gains along the way of a delayed result because you've gone at it together, and versus just me doing it on my own.
No, 100%. And I think even an individual, even a leader that might make the final call, if he's doing that in collaboration with a team, they as a team will do more. And I think we can always say that.
Exactly.
I think the paralysis by analysis does exist as well, where you never
Mm-hmm.
make a decision. So
Mm-hmm.
you definitely do need someone that can make that final decision, but just not completely on their own. I think that's the balancing act, which I think I see with leaders. The good ones can listen, but know when they need to make that final decision, but they have listened to get there. And I think that's the hardest thing that I see from the work we do, the people we speak with, and so on, is the ones that really stand out have that balance right. Um, I think that ties in really nicely, I think, with today. And I think there's some really good stuff we've discussed. But I think if we were to kind of look at, from a summary standpoint in terms of sort of moving towards the end of today's sort of chat, if we were to look at maybe either something that we're summarizing from today or something that we've not discussed today, so it can be either, but a kind of lesson learned message to younger self, kind of, if I could tell my younger self something, it would be this. Maybe biggest lesson learned, and maybe that you want to say that to help others, or just self-reflection, and then a kind of the future. I'm focusing on this, or I think people should focus on this. So a kind of a beginning, middle, and an end, as it were, of a kind of reflection journey, I think would be a really great way to kind of tie off today. So yeah, over to you for whatever you want to put into those three buckets would be a great way to tie it up. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, a few things. One is, if I could go back and we always say if we could go back and tell our younger selves what we do tell them, but I think the journey is you have to make the mistake and you have to learn from yourself. It's the same as parents telling us, don't make the mistakes we make. We do, right? Like you kind of have
Yeah.
to make the mistakes sometimes. So I think for me, it's um, kind of go easy on yourself. It's a lesson I
Mm.
still tell myself now. I think I'm I think I am very hard on myself, and I think women in general are very hard on themselves. We are our worst enemies or our biggest judges sometimes, and it's kind of go easy on yourself. It's okay to
Mm.
fail. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to learn. You actually get your biggest growth from making mistakes and failing, and that's okay. I think
Yeah.
another thing that I would encourage or give advice to, especially women, is that I in my earlier career again grew up with this notion of very few women make it to the top, and you almost had to be in competition with each other. But I very quickly learned that that's not the case, and that as women we need to be taking each other with us on the journey. We need to be uplifting each other. Society tells us and dictates to us that there's very few spots at the top for women, but we have the ability collectively to change societal norms and standards. And so we are not in competition with each other. We are in competition with societal norms and standards. Fight that
Yeah.
and change that. And as you rise as a woman, take other women with you. It makes you stronger. Um, and in terms of kind of just for future, I guess, in terms of focus, um, this, I feel like the world is burning. I feel like there's so much going on in the world right now. Um, you know, geopolitically, just we're talking about energy efficiency, you're talking about social impact, you're talking about poverty. Um, I think we've created the space that we're in. I think we need to make sure that we don't get deeper into this mess. And I think we need to work collectively to get out of it. And I really think we need to give care, more care to the world and more care to each other as human beings. And let's not get lost in kind of non-humanistic aspects. It can help us and we can use those things to help us. But I think we need greater care in this world. I feel like the world is in such a turmoil at the moment, and we really need to kind of collectively come together and get ourselves out of it. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's where I want to focus on. Yeah, in terms of my future, at least.
Yeah, no, I think the the messages there, I think, are really nicely put together in terms of today. I think it ties well, and I think ultimately the key takeaway, even though there is the world needs to come together, it is that positivity part. There is
Mhm.
we know that there are things that can be improved on. We need to collectively move in these sorts of directions to do that, and I think again, it's acknowledging things like AI will benefit in certain ways, needs to be cautious in other ways, but overall,
Absolutely.
are we listening to the problems and trying to fix them? And that goes back to some of the earlier messages. So I think it all kind of comes together quite nicely of make sure we're listening, understanding the problem, fix the actual problem, not the one that we think is the problem. And then generally, with a little bit of, God willing, we'll we'll collectively move things forward. So yeah, look, I
100%.
think yeah, from my side, look, today's been really good. I think it's been great to have your sort of take on the sustainability ESG side of things as well. I think it's a really important topic for not just the podcast, but for the world, of course. So I think from my side, thank you so much for being on today.
Pleasure.
To the listeners, please do like, subscribe, and share. And we'll continue to send you more great content over the coming weeks. And thanks a lot for watching and listening. And again, thank you so much for your time today. And yeah, we'll speak again soon. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
You too. Pleasure.
Cheers. Thanks.